Good evening, everybody.
Hi, Laura.
There was some technical difficulties, so we are live streaming right now, just so you know. Our
Okay.
recording is paused, but we are live streamed. And I
Okay.
cannot pause that.
You gotta love the modern world of meetings.
Yeah, that's what that extra Oregon City planning, my cell phone is live streaming us.
Oh my goodness.
Apparently my computer's broken. How are you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
Wonderful. Good, good, good. Although it's a crazy day with all the stuff in Oregon City. Fires nearby, should I
I
say.
know there's one on 99 in South End. Is there another one?
No, just that one.
That one's bad enough.
Too close to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, let's see. Uh, just to fill you in, Nancy, we're going to be among friends today. So Samuel, from the manager of the Weedwise program, we talked about he'll be here
Great.
for our invasive species list and associated flyer, and then Andrew Land is the person who sources trees for Friends of Trees. He's going to join us for the street tree list conversation. I called around to some nurseries and didn't get a reply from nurseries, but I think Andrew's a great person to help us with
Who
some
was
of
the
our
person from the Weedwise?
Samuel, and it's Leininger.
Okay.
Leininger?
Leininger?
Leininger.
Yeah.
How are you doing, Gary?
I'm doing pretty good. So
Great.
I missed you guys last month. So anyways, and it's nice to see you, Laura, taking over. I bet, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Doing well. Just trying to do Pete as much justice as I can.
Okay. Yes, I know.
But you kind of got to downgrade with me because I do not have a degree in forestry like Pete did.
Pete was special, but you are special too. So
Yeah.
don't sell yourself short. Okay.
Just gotta learn the ropes, you know.
To be honest, I think you need more of a degree in technology, or like a meeting facilitator. I mean, it's pretty impressive job you guys do. So
Yes, I feel like as long as I can get the right people to the room, then that's good for right now. And John's here, so we're in good hands.
Great. I was gonna say that it'd be good to have him here to talk about these invasive species because, you know, my list was not meant to be inclusive. This is a start. And like I said, this is a first really rough draft. So
Oh yes, I should get that on the website. And then I also have the Excel spreadsheet for street tree list. Still have those two documents for us to view.
great.
Was there homework? I didn't review anything. So are you talking about a list that I should be looking at right now?
No, there's no homework. I started doing a invasive species list. And I just did a brain dump and it wasn't meant to be inclusive. And I sent it out to the rest of the committee and Sam added a few, but you know, we're just, and then I realized as I started making it, I realized that I think we just need to talk about what we want on that list. Because I initially just started thinking about the things that are really invasive and then in the local area. I mean, because there's invasive things like I think everybody, including me, has wire lettuce and nipplewort and certain weeds in their yard. It's just they're ubiquitous. But then there's other things that are coming in that we probably need to be more aware of and alert the public that if they have it, they might want to get rid of it. So it's kind of, but you know, we need to talk more about what would help the city more in terms of, you know, and I'm not talking about making a list that we're going to go in and fine people for having ivy or something. We could, but I don't know that that's going to be conducive to getting rid of ivy. So
That sounds like a hostile takeover there if you go there.
yeah, and I like carrots. I like carrots rather than stick approaches. So, you know, maybe a list of don't plant this stuff. And if this is in your yard, you maybe want to pull it up. So
I think a lot of people are like me and I couldn't tell you one plant from the other. I just don't know my plant stuff. But
Well, see,
when
we're
I was
talking
when I
about
was putting my yard in, we bought a newer house but no yard, so it's like people are just handing you things and you don't know what they are, and you're just happy to get a plant and put it in the ground, and then you find out later, how come I have so many of those? Because they're a little invasive.
Yes, I have done that. There's one thing on my list that I have all over my yard because I put it in my hanging baskets like 30 years ago, and I still can't get rid of it. I do nothing but pull that out continuously, and it's like,
Okay, and we'll talk about that one.
All right, so welcome everybody. We are live streaming on YouTube, and I'm going to hit record, so we are recording this as well. There we go. Brian, I love the dedication from the car.
Yeah, happy to be here. I hit some traffic. Hopefully only 20 minutes of this, and then you'll see my home office next.
hopefully you're not on 99 by South End Road.
No, I'm some crazy backwoods way that Waze is taking me, but it's better than sitting in traffic.
Yeah.
But before we start, for those of you I haven't met before, my name is Laura Turner. I'm the Community Development Director, and I will be helping Natural Resources Committee until we find a replacement for Pete. And just thank you to Pete for his more than 15 years dedication to Oregon City and all the knowledge and help that he's given to Oregon City. But so I am your interim replacement. So I'm a touch behind on things. Forgive me. But I'm here to help.
Well, I guess I'll officially call the meeting to order, even though we've kind of started, but that's fine. So we're officially starting now. Do we want to go around and introduce ourselves? Everybody that's here? We could do that because there are people who are normally here. I'm Nancy Brochot. I am the chair of the Natural Resource Committee. And in my real life, I am a professor at Linfield University.
I'm Mike Hamilton. I'm the vice chair of the committee, and I'm retired from an academic position with the University of California in Berkeley and Riverside.
I'm Brian Quisler. I'm pretty new to the committee. I worked for the Forest Service for 14 years and now work in marketing, but just wanted to get involved. I live in Oregon City and wanted to get involved with the city, so that's why I'm here.
I'll jump in. I'm new to the gang. I'm Andrew Land. I'm with Friends of Trees, and I'm mostly just helping out Ian and Erica, standing in for them. They couldn't make the meeting, but this is kind of trees and climate change is kind of one of my passions. So they asked if I could pop in and say hi to everybody.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
I'm Devin Pilney. I'm been on the committee for about a year. I'm a financial planner, but my wife and I have a little bit of property just in Redland outside of Oregon City, and we're doing a bunch of like natural hedgerows and things. So it's just kind of like a side hobby, and I wanted to get involved in the community, and so that's kind of how I got connected with the NRC. So, hi everyone.
I'll go next. Hi, everybody. I'm Samantha Wolf. I'm formerly with Clackamas County's Parks and Forestry program, but now I am with Cardno as a wetlands/soil scientist. And some of my other work, I also am president of Oregon Community Trees, which is a statewide nonprofit promoting and advocating for urban community forestry across the state. As well as vice chair of the Oregon Heritage Tree Committee, with similar goals, only attributing conservation towards large, mature trees that tell the story of Oregon's people's history, and many more. But I'll let someone else introduce themselves.
I can go next. My name is Carrie Young, and I'm a geographer, and I love land and trees. I'm an Oregon City resident, and I'm also a small business owner.
I'll hop in. I'm Sam Liner. I'm the Weedwise Program Manager for the Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District. And Laura invited me here tonight to help you guys with your nuisance plant list, or I should say invasive plant list. So thank you, Laura, for inviting me.
Thank you for coming.
And maybe I'm John Lewis. I'm the Public Works Director for Oregon City. I'm just kind of a meeting junkie. So I get, whether I get invited or not, I just show up. And so that's why I'm here tonight. I also have an interest in street trees, and, we manage a lot of property, stormwater facilities mostly, maybe some open space areas. And so I'm trying to stay in tune with NRC, Oregon Watershed Council, and groups like that. And yeah, this group is pretty informative. So just like listening in. So I'll probably just listen in today mostly. Thanks.
I introduced myself before the meeting started. So my name is Laura Turro. I'm the Community Development Director for the city, which means that I support our planning and our building departments. And I've been with the city more than 18 years. I forgot I did help out the NRC maybe 12 years ago. I don't know, time flies. But I'm happy to be here and really excited about this group of NRC members because there's so much knowledge in the virtual room and I'm loving it. And also that we have the right people to help us who are not on NRCs to fill out our conversations too. So thank you everybody for coming.
Definitely, thank you. So we need to adopt the agenda. Does anybody have any changes, things they want to move around, or are we okay with just what we have on hand?
Looks good to me.
Okay. Are there any public comments? I don't think anybody from the oh, Chris is here. Hi, Chris. You want to introduce yourself, Chris, when you're muted right now.
Sorry about that. I was just saying hello to everybody. Sorry I'm late. I just got out of work
That happens.
all the time.
I guess we move on to old business, and the first thing we have is the draft invasive species list. So this started several months ago, and we started talking about how do we communicate with citizens of Oregon City what the worst invasive species are, and so that they can care about removing them and know what they are. And so Chris, at the last meeting, we looked at a flyer that he has made that is awesome. I mean, I would put a poster of that in my house. That's how good it is. It's really an awesome flyer.
Appreciate it.
I looked at that the first time, like, wow, this is really cool. So, we have the elevator and we have some of these nasty invasive species. And so actually there was a member of the public who came last time, and he thought it was great, but he suggested that it would be really good to have that flyer be two-sided and put on the back side of it, pick the top 5 or 6 species that we really want the city to focus on, or the people in the city to focus on removing, meaning the citizens. And then put pictures and maybe a little bit about how to control them or something. So just a little blip on different species. And so the city has lists of nuisance species, and it has lists of native species. And the nuisance species list has a lot of things on it that some are native, like poison oak's on it. And yes, it's a nuisance species because I'm horribly allergic to it. In fact, I have it on my arm and I haven't been anywhere near it, so I have no idea how I got it. But I actually have friends who have poison oak on the edge of their property because it discourages people from trespassing. So in their view, it's not very nuisancey. And there's like horsetails were on it, and they're native, and they're a nuisance if you don't want them, but they're not that bad. I mean, so it seemed to me that the city needed to come up with a list of invasive species. And so I came up with this, and this was just kind of pulling things off of our list and off of the city of Portland's and Metro's lists. It wasn't meant to be all inclusive. I'm not sure that everything needs to be on it. But as I started doing it, I started realizing that there's a combination of things here that are really invasive, that are really, they're spreading rapidly throughout the area and throughout forested areas around us, that we really need to control. There are other things on here that are in people's yards. And if you look at even Portland's invasive species list, it contains things like wire lettuce and nipplewort and these weeds that are in everybody's yard. I mean, I've got them in my yard. I've pulled them for 30 years and they're still in my yard. And so those, and they're not taking over, they're just there. But then there are things that are really bad. And so it seemed like we needed to have a discussion of what needs to go on this list. You know, for example, the tree of heaven is considered invasive, but, you know, it's not taking over Portland or Forest Park or Newton, you know, Newell Canyon or any of those places. So do we need it on there? Should we have two lists with a list of invasive species, and then maybe a list with the worst of the worst, the things that we really want people to start focusing on? You know, like the things like don't plant this, like maybe English ivy and English holly and tree of heaven, hoping that people, and like the vinca, hoping people won't plant them anymore, even though in some cases I know you can still buy them at nurseries. And I couldn't find a list for Oregon of what you can't buy in nurseries. I'm sure it's there somewhere, but I looked before the meeting and I couldn't find it. But then there are other things like garlic mustard and the Italian arum, which is also called lords and ladies for some strange reason. Some of the knapweeds, the traveler's joy clematis is just taking over bad. Poison hemlock's really bad. It's invasive. It's also very, very poisonous. And I find it in people's front yards and I tend to stop, and they have small children going, you need to get that out of your yard because it is that poisonous. And herb Robert is spreading everywhere. And so it seems like somehow we need to make a decision as to what we want to put on, how we want to do this list, whether we want to make an all-inclusive list and then list, you know, highlight ones that are particularly invasive, or whether we want multiple lists. And I'm not sure the best way to do this. What do you guys think? Maybe Sam, since he's the Weedwise guy, would have a suggestion as the best approach to this.
Well, I mean, I can certainly chime in. You know, I've been involved with making weed lists for a dozen years now, and I've done it, I don't know, several dozen times, I'd say, for various reasons. And, you know, the whole issue with weed lists, it oftentimes comes down to what's the desired outcome, what's the desired use for the list. So, you know, oftentimes if we're talking about a nuisance plant list, this is a list that's going to be used for regulatory purposes. Right. You know, it's a plant that, you know, people could be regulated upon, you know, and potentially even city properties could be impacted by plants on a nuisance plant list. So if we're talking about a nuisance list, you know, it needs to be tempered with the understanding that there's teeth associated with plants that get put on that list. You know, the other consideration, you know, it sounds like for this group, it's more about kind of an outreach perspective, you know, like you're trying to highlight specific plants for, you know, say Oregon City in particular, or an urban environment. And, you know, so every time we've really worked on, you know, things that are geared more towards the public, you know, it's very important to keep the message somewhat succinct. And so folks can kind of, you know, sink their teeth into that a little bit and, you know, try to get some traction. So I think really focusing on what you want to see in terms of outcome, you know, is really key and important to this. In terms of the list, I know you mentioned, you know, like some of these are really highly invasive, you know, some of these are kind of general common weeds in disturbed areas and that sort of thing. You know, one of the things that we actually do at the Soil and Water Conservation District and as the noxious weed entity for Clackamas County is we actually curate the county's noxious weed list. And so we've actually gone through, cataloged all of the noxious weeds for the state of Oregon. as well as the noxious weeds for the state of Washington as part of our noxious weed list. And in part, that's because we are members, and actually one of our staff is a coordinator for 2 of the cooperative weed management areas that influence Clackamas County. So one is the Columbia Gorge Cooperative Weed Management Area, which includes the Sandy River watershed. So that's kind of outside the focus area for this committee here today. But the other one is the 4 County Cooperative Weed Management Area, which really serves more of the Portland metropolitan region. And they actually curate a list as well of noxious weeds and have different categories associated with those in terms of, highest priority must eradicate lists versus the more common kind of maintenance species and that sort of thing. So, one kind of shortcut for you guys, if you're looking for like that comprehensive nuisance list, would be to just accept the county weed list as it is and go from there. And that's a really kind of simple way. And then the maintenance isn't necessarily required for the city because that's maintained by, ourselves with feedback from these other entities, both the states and the cooperative weed management area. So that's certainly an option. In terms of the, kind of the invasive list, like what you're talking about here, I think, sky's the limit. Like, what do you guys think is the most, the most compelling weeds to kind of highlight? I mean, I'm sure I have an opinion, but I'm sure all you do as well. The one thing I'd caution about, especially as we get into this, and as I was reviewing the draft list, is there's a lot of species in there that are still horticulturally sold.
Mhm.
And, putting those on a list can definitely create some just regulatory problems associated with it. And even for producers. So I'd say if there's a list or if there's a particular plant that you would like to see on or prohibited from sale, I think really the optimal place to take that is actually to Oregon Department of Agriculture and nominate it for noxious weed listing. So that would be the approved approach. But I mean, in terms of looking at the, municipal code for Oregon City, I mean, it already cites noxious vegetation, and noxious is a regulatory term, which would then defer to the state and county weed lists. So that you guys are kind of already set up that way. But in terms of the outreach, I think, you could really pick and choose. But I would probably stick with like 10 species rather than trying to go to like, 20 or 30 or that sort of thing, because then it's just going to get lost. And, really the intent of this seems like it's more for outreach and try to incite action. And I think that's the real important thing to focus on.
Thank you. That's a good suggestion. And I like, we could stay with the one we have, although I kind of like the idea that if you have one that's updated regularly, at the state county level, that would be better, because there are things like Italian arum is not anywhere on that list. And it should be, because it's spreading rapidly. On my walks, it's in everybody's yard around here.
Yeah, that's correct. That Italian arum's a unique case because it's not listed in the state of Oregon, but it is listed in Washington state, and it is listed by our cooperative weed management areas. So we actually include that in the county weed list for Clackamas County because it is being managed by partners within our region. So that's where our list reaches a little further than even the state list, which is more, at a broader geography than the county itself.
Right. So that's the Conservation Soil and Water District.
Yeah, and it's actually the county weed list for Clackamas County. So
Okay.
the soil and water is recognized as the weed entity for Clackamas County. And I
Okay.
can certainly share a link to that list with Laura for future reference as well.
That would be great. I would really appreciate that. And do you have a list somewhere, a link to where I can see what state, what plants are regulated by the state? Because again, I tried to find that and I was spending about an hour doing it. So I'm sure if I'd spent more time, but I was not finding it.
Yeah, if I had a chat window in here, I could pop it into there. But yeah, I mean, if you go to weedwise.conservationdistrict.org and click the weeds link, that will take you to the county noxious weed list. And we've got columns for each of the states and each of the CWMAs.
Okay, thank you. That would be very useful. because I started looking at what's regulated and what's not. I'm sure Vinca's still for sale, even though, you know, it's horrible and my neighbor has it and I do nothing but pull it on my side of the fence. And
Yeah, and it is one that is not listed, I don't think, in Washington State or Oregon.
did Ivy ever get listed?
Ivy is listed, so both English ivy as well as Baltic or Irish ivy
Right.
are both listed. And you know, most people call it English ivy, but most of what we see actually in the area is Baltic or Irish ivy.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
So I have a question for you, Sam. As you've been involved with this for so many years, what have you found to be really good motivation for getting citizens in particular areas, you know, city or counties, really remotivated to address some of these noxious weeds, you know, short of the stick? I mean, I agree with Nancy, the carrot
Yeah.
approach is kind of where we're at, but, you know, we also want to dovetail with enforcement here in OC. And so we, you know, they have the best available information. So just curious what other programs kind of intersect, you know, because the list thing, I mean, if you're into lists, that's great, but
Right.
it doesn't go very far unless you know how to look it up and, you know, provide kind of an atlas and, you know, but then you want to go a step further, which is more, you know, gardening, master gardener approaches to weed
Right.
management in your yard, you know, so that's,
Well, two examples come to mind of like really successful outreach campaigns associated with cities. And one of them's out of Bend. They have this big event every year where they go to a community park, and it's a lot like the Solve events, but it's really been adopted by the whole city. And you know, people have kind of made a party out of the thing, and it's called it's actually called the Pull Together. And they do it in city parks in Bend every year. And they have like live music comes out. They have like one of the local breweries comes out and serves drinks, and people go and spend a couple hours, and they kind of make a huge party out of it. They got t-shirts and they do all sorts of stuff. And it was just put together by a concerned citizen in Bend, Oregon, that decided that, you know, I want to do something about this. And so she got people motivated about it. And, you know, she was kind of in marketing. I heard we had one marketing person on the committee here, I think. And, you know, it's like, that's a perfect person to tap into for something like this. A similar occurrence that comes to mind is actually out of Boise, Idaho. There's a bicycling group there that became heavily involved with, it's actually a nonprofit that gives bicycles out to children that need bikes, and it tries to help, you know, kind of community development through bicycling. And one of the things that they found was they were having puncture vine be a huge problem with keeping bike tires full and all that sort of stuff. And so one of the ways that they were trying to, you know, curb their constant fixing of bikes they were handing out to kids was they organized a puncture vine, you know, weed pull, and, you know, had like a kind of like a bounty and award thing for how many pounds people pulled every year. And they hosted a big party in the park and had, you know, music and all that sort of stuff. So I guess the short thing is, apart from the stick and, you know, going back to the carrot thing, is making it fun and making it a community building and like a civic activity, you know, but making it fun and not like work, you know, like, oh, come to a work party. No, just come to the party. And I think that resounds with people that want a sense of community and see some value in that. So those are two examples that I know have just been really hugely successful. So Boise Goat Fest or Goat Head Festival and the Bend Pull Together. So you guys can all go Google those and check out all the cool t-shirts and party photos. And, you know, they have a bike parade for the Goat Fest. It's a huge thing. It's really amazing.
Sounds really cool.
It sounds really cool. I know we had him come out and talk at one of our CWMA meetings last winter. He's actually one of the city council members in Boise that helped to organize this thing. And it was one of the most compelling things that I've seen in a long time. And he did it's amazing what they did, you know, from top to bottom, how they approached the thing. And I think it's something that really cities should look to emulate. I mean, we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel, but instead be stealing all the good ideas we can. That's my opinion.
I'd like to respond to that anecdotally and just kind of give an example of something similar that we do have here. in Oregon City that is successful in that way. It's all, organized within the community, but with city support. So basically out here on the McLaughlin Promenade, every month the neighbors come together in just this ad hoc group and do cleanup and weed removal. And they've been doing it now, and I've been a part of it from time to time for 6 years, uninterrupted. Might take seasonal breaks, but yeah, we kind of keep it going. It was started by one incredibly active person in the city, Francesca Anton. I think probably a couple of people recognize her name. And then, she kind of passed the baton and people have just kind of kept it going. But I think one of the reasons why it's been incredibly successful is because we have had support from Oregon City Parks Department. Because they're there providing the waste bins, providing the hand tools, providing personnel, I think on volunteer time when the group gets together. And yeah, without them, without that kind of public-private partnership, I don't think it could keep going. But just because it's been going for so long and it's still going so strong, I mean, I think it's something worth emulating and copying in other neighborhoods. I know it's certainly in Parks' best interest because it keeps down their maintenance costs. And it's in the community's interest because people get involved, it usually turns into something social afterwards. I think that's why it just kind of keeps going. So yeah, if in different neighborhoods, people want to kind of take ownership over their local parks, yeah, maybe that's something we could help coordinate.
Right. Or do something, have once a year, have, some other park, like we could do Waterboard Park and then do Rivercrest Park and then do, different years, do different parks, but so that we'd get different people from different neighborhoods involved.
Yeah, and then once it gets going, hopefully it just maintains that momentum.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You will be meeting Kendall Reed, our Parks and Rec Director, at your next meeting.
Good.
Okay.
I've been wanting to get him going for several months now, so. We'll bug him then.
Oh, then the other thing I wanted to mention, this is taking a couple steps back, going back to the flyer. Sorry, Nancy, I have to correct you a little bit. The feedback that we got from the Kenema resident who suggested it was that it be more imperative of a message specifically around like the ice storms and the threat that, big climbing invasives pose to just like pulling down these large trees, especially to residents that live in like very wooded neighborhoods. So what he would like to see is a more kind of timely message when that matters, to kind of address it then and kind of give, I don't want to say a threat, but, just kind of let people, make them aware of what's at stake and what's, them managing their own property. So maybe we can consider a different kind of flyer, a different kind of insert come winter time.
Right. We certainly could mention the fact that ivy and the clematis are two of the worst in terms of causing tree limbs to come down more readily in storms, and ivy,
Yep.
especially with landslides, because ODOT planted it all over along the sides of freeways, and then in '96 what they found out was that it's so shallow rooted that was where a lot of landslides occurred, and so then they started taking it all out. So
That was the clematis that did that?
no, that was the English ivy, or the
English
Baltic
ivy.
ivy now. It was everything was English ivy for a long time, and then all of a sudden it became heterospa because
Yeah.
there's multiple species involved. But
Yeah,
it was
back in
ivy
Virginia,
that was, yeah.
Yeah.
But the clematis does too, because it grows up in the trees and weighs everything down. And we could always start with
Okay.
those on our flyer. We could put those at the top, because that would get to people who did lose limbs and potentially have those species involved. And even Himalayan blackberry can get really tall, and at least start bringing down smaller limbs. So
I have a comment or a suggestion. So I like the the kind of attractive nature of the flyer, and the inherent kind of aesthetic, I think we could utilize it as kind of a platform to highlight a weed abatement activity. So if it's like the front page and then we have a secondary page with information and then we highlight a specific target species. So it could be, we could, alter maybe some of the language on the front saying like, invasives, weed event. And then on the back, it talks about we're going to, like at this date, this location, we're going to tackle ivy and, kind of carry over that same aesthetic, that same kind of feel that the front page highlights, and then carry it over into an event description, if that makes sense. And then we could then utilize that front flyer over and over again. So it's rather generic in terms of what species we're targeting, but it's like it's an eye catcher to bring in the attention of the public and saying, we're going to have a weed event or we're going to have a weed something, and then use it as like a headline, as it were. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I like that idea. And it also helps, I think, as me coming from a homeowner and been pulling weeds my entire life. And it was one of my favorite chores as a child, like with my dad. So it allows me to kind of dumb it down. Like, what am I focusing on this year? What is, most important? How can I make a difference? And then adding, we talk about a community event, what about, just then something clever in the lines of marketing this as this is stress relief, so this is therapy, it's too bad we can't get, Kaiser Permanente do a great commercial on it, or, it's, so what can you do in your own home and or help your neighbors, Nancy, as you said, it's like, I do all this work to try and get rid of this weed, yet it's right next door to me and my neighbors, it's gonna come back, so utilizing that flyer, which is great, the best that we can.
I did convince my neighbors to get rid, their whole backyard was horrible. The guy bought the place a few years ago and he's been focusing on fixing the place up and not on gardening. And then all the tree, and he lost a lot of branches and trees. And so he actually removed he had ivy, he had Himalayan blackberries, he had the evergreen blackberry, he had the clematis, all of them in his backyard was just this huge thing. And he went and got it all down. And I just suggested, I go, those are really bad. You should get those down. And he did. And his mom moved in downstairs. So she's kind of directing him to, an elderly woman going, we need to clean the yard up. So it's been really good. It's like, I look outside and it's like, this looks so much better. So yeah, but if we can do that to more people, and those are the people with the vinca. So I don't worry about it. They got rid of the really bad stuff. I'll just keep pulling the vinca out when it comes over. But yeah. So yeah, but I like that idea. So we'd have to come up with an event that we're going to sponsor maybe, and then figure out, which species we want to do. We want to do Waterboard Park and focus on ivy. We could focus on ivy and clematis because they're both so common everywhere,
So I have one question as well about private property weeds. So I know Waterboard Park is definitely an excellent candidate for a weed event, but there's also going to be the case with private property, especially in the, I think it was the Camas neighborhood. Was that where the resident came from? Was that right? Kanema, thank you. Sorry, Camas, Kanema. So I think they might appreciate, something of a similar nature. So maybe similar in nature to what Chris explained about the, sorry, I forgot the name of the place, the promenade. So a promenade, neighborhood pool would be excellent for the Kanema neighborhood, I would think. And maybe we can try to facilitate in a development of a similar neighborhood weed management team there. So if maybe Chris, if we want to develop an event, maybe not as elaborate as a, neighborhood block party with live music and, hot dogs, but maybe something more suited to that neighborhood that they would appreciate. And maybe we could bring some promenade folks to say, here's what we've been doing and here's how we do it. And kind of, integrate a neighborhood weed program there, because I think there's a limitation with NRC with private property. I don't know if you would agree, Laura, but I'm open to more discussion about that.
Yes, and I'm curious if John is listening right now or not either, because when we had received that complaint, we actually called around to see if there were grants from Metro or like places to work on the right of way, and specifically an ivy pole on trees in the right of way that's unbuilt right of way. So it looks like private property, but it's public owned, which was sort of the nature of the request. And so that had been sort of simmering as a need to address, but I'll let John talk about it since he is ultimately in charge of the right of way.
Wow, a lot of good ideas. Kenema is a neighborhood that I think would be worthy of, mentioned parks. So Parks generally sponsors the parks properties, and sometimes Public Works gets rallied into those. But Kenema, while it has 2 parks on either end of it, and in fact, the Kenema Park is, if you talk ivy, again, not knowing which ivy we're talking about there, but there's lots. And if you just drive South End Road, I think is it the clematis or clematis that's growing up in those trees as well. So yeah, lots of opportunity in the Kenema neighborhood between the park, public right of way, or private property. And the only thing I would mention, I don't know how connected you folks are with the CIC or the neighborhood folks, but I definitely see some value in a partnership between an Ivy Clean and, connecting with the key neighborhood folks to figure out what maybe they already have planned. Or I know that both McLaughlin does the Waterboard Park invasive pool, and then you mentioned the promenade that's also in McLaughlin neighborhood. I'm not sure of the invasives there as much as just need for weed, just general cleanup along the park, but Kenema is loaded. And Laura, I'm not sure where you're going with funding. I don't know that I recall doing a lot of or any research on grant opportunities, but I think you did. Okay. So but yeah, I'd be Kenema, especially whether it's in the park or in the right of way, we can do something similar in terms of having some dedicated staff, making sure we've got some tools and we work with B&B Leasing, by the way, has always been a big sponsor too. So so there's lots of opportunities there. Yeah.
Maybe
I think it's important to pick I know I staff the TAC and Transportation Advisory Committee, and we're trying to set goals. Usually groups like this get they're passionate about it, and they set their goals a little high. Maybe you're talking 1 or 2 events a year, and you're doing that in coordination with the neighborhood, and rather than thinking big, monthly events or anything, like that. So just know if you have, I don't know, has this group done one before? No. So it might be, just trying to set an attainable goal, have it be super successful as one super successful event, as opposed to, 3 or 4 not so successful events. But yeah, if Kenema's on the list, we've probably got just as much unimproved right of way as, well, not as much as property, but there's a lot of needs in the unimproved right of way of the Kenema, and I know they would be open to something like that, and we'd be happy to help.
I agree with you, John. I think it's really important to coordinate with the neighborhood association, so we're not stepping on, a process that they've been doing for years. I'm in the McLaughlin, and I don't participate much in the association, but I'm on their mailing list. So I see how frequently they do organize Ivy Pool in different urban parks in our neighborhood. And I suspect other neighborhoods probably have something similar going on. I'd like to really think about what our expertise is that we might be able to provide as, consult with the neighborhood associations, and I think I mentioned it last month, but, if we helped out on perhaps just weed identification workshop or something that the neighborhood associations could be invited to, and we can demo that in some of the weedier parks. It might be useful to homeowners that are curious about what they might have, and what, if we had an interesting list of presenters, that could include, gardening centric people, as well as, more botanist types like us. It could be interesting and a little different than what the neighborhood associations are already doing, which is mainly physical labor.
Yeah, it
So-
might be good to talk to the president of, or whoever is the head of the Friends of Kenema group and see what they're doing and if they want any help, plant ID help, organizing help. We could certainly use that flyer to work with them to organize a pull event. So, I'm willing to reach out to whoever that person is. We'll have to look them up, but but that shouldn't be too hard.
I just had a thought specifically about Kenema. I'm just thinking of like the right of way there in people's yards. My big concern would be, if we were to organize a group of people, there's a lot of safety concerns there. There's a lot of steep slopes, and if even, if we go into somebody's backyard and pull all the ivy and don't put anything down to replace it for bank stabilization, you could think about like landslides and things like that. But, I do think that there's an opportunity in Old Kenema Park, which I believe is city property. And I think if we were to organize something there, we wouldn't be touching or stepping on anybody's toes as far as like private landowners. And it would also just be a great demonstration event. We could show how to remove different things, and not just pools, but, how to cut the climbing plants at the base and, what techniques work where. And we'd be doing so on a relatively flat, even surface where we don't have the same logistical and safety concerns.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
No, I think that's a valid concern. Plus the fact that there are people who love ivy.
Yeah.
One of my students who's working for me this summer, she was at her uncle's house and he had ivy all over the bank. And she started pulling it and he came out yelling at her because he loves his ivy. And she's just like, no, okay, never mind, I'll leave it. But wouldn't want to pull somebody's ivy that they love on their trees. Well, I would, but not really.
Yeah, my mom's one of them. I had to talk her down.
Yeah.
Talk her
Yeah.
out of that and Vinca. Some
Mhm.
people just love it.
It's pretty.
Mhm.
So anything else that we want to date? I will, are you gonna, Sam, are you gonna send me or send Laura the link to the list of invasive species, the county list?
I already sent them to Laura. They're in her
Okay.
inbox right now.
All right, okay. So
So-
Laura, if you send that to me, I think maybe we should just move to adopt that list rather than the cities, which is static and never changes. I think it'd be good to be linked into something that was going to change as new species come on the scene, because they come on the scene all the time.
Yeah, I'd say the one gap in that list, though, that you mentioned, that you alluded to earlier on, is other things that are maybe a public health hazard. So
Mm.
like the poison oak and some of that sort of stuff that you may, consider from just a public health consideration. That might be something you might want to think about at least as you move forward.
Right. Well, we could keep their noxious weed list and we could maybe call it something else. I don't know.
I did want to echo too what Chris mentioned about the potential hazard and the polling. I know, from presentations and working with former NRC members, and all the work that was done through like Friends of Parks Foundation and all the work out at Waterboard. I mean, Waterboard in particular is one that I've always been kind of concerned about getting volunteers out there because of the verticality associated with it and because of the instability. I mean, Oregon City, we're literally a pretty vertical city in general. So, I mean, to me, that begs like the need for climbing vines to be a primary target for this group. And even if it was like save the trees or save the cliffs kind of thing, it'd be a kind of a good approach for Oregon City. That's kind of unique to Oregon City, that verticality issue. But there are safety considerations that need to be, thought about in that perspective. But those are kind of the hardest things to address. Oregon City is pretty rife with them, really. And if I had to pick one visual spot in the city that I can think of, it's Lynn Avenue. Around that corner, coming around Lynn Avenue as you come into the older part of the city, heading towards the library. And, the ivy and clematis there is epic, along with the knotweed down below it. So it's kind of, if you wanted to adopt one spot, that would be a great one.
Yeah, that's true.
One other that raised a thought in my mind. So Laura Kelly and her group have been working pretty hard at trying to get some attention on a trail between the promenade and Kenema. Then it drops right into the old Kenema Park. We tried to get a grant to kind of build the pathway through there. So actually have a shared use path that would meander along. There's a PGE power station along there, and then it comes out on 99E by the two bars and restaurants out there. So, but eventually that would take you up to the new Kenema Park as well. But that stretch right there might be another good focus area. We might be able to take some credit for that for a future grant to get the pathway in there. I agree, Sam. I drive Lynn Avenue all the time, so it's another very good location for that. But when before you mentioned that, I was thinking of this Kenema McLaughlin. What do we call it, Laura? McLaughlin Promenade to Kenema Park Trail or something like that. So you can see the community involvement. That's a published report. So there's a lot of community involvement that went into kind of trying to, designate some of the things that would go into that trail in the future. So there's kind of an action plan, maybe not so much about invasive removals, but that pairs really well with it.
And I seem to remember the Parks Foundation actually moving towards that, years ago, where they were looking at connectivity along that stretch, along the cliff face. And that was a big consideration. I know I put a support letter in for a Nature of the Neighborhoods grant years ago related to that. And I don't think it was successful, but I do think that there is a strong case to be made for that connectivity from just a wildlife and natural area perspective along that stretch in particular. So I think that's a great idea, John.
All right, so I have a couple of questions about sort of next steps and where we're going. So we have a flyer, and it sounds like we have a plan for the flyer, which is to pair with some type of event that may be ongoing, but we want to sort of get one under our belt and figure it out first. And I'm hearing people talk about Old Kenema Park, and Kendall's coming next time, so that's great. And also sounding like it's pairing with our other efforts for the McLaughlin to Kenema Trail too. There's also, Nancy, you had mentioned adoption of the county's list. And so I wanted to sort of circle back on this list. What do we mean by adoption? Are we talking about adoption by resolution of the county's list, or are we just talking about adoption for us to put on our website and to use is for educational purposes, or and this is sort of the piece that I didn't really know where you were going with this project since I stepped into this role sort of
Right.
halfway through the project. So
Well, we were talking about, last time we were talking about, because we have a noxious weed list and then we have the native list, and we were talking about just having an invasive species list. Because there are species that aren't on the city noxious list even. So maybe, since maybe the county one, let me look at it, but it might be, that sounds good. And it sounds like it rates like how bad it is, whether it needs to be removed or whether, maybe you shouldn't just plant it or something. But let me look at that. But it may be that we start requesting, maybe the city adopt that as their nuisance plant list rather than the one we have now. But I'd want to compare and contrast, and I'm sure that John and Kendall would probably want to compare and contrast as well. I'm not proposing making a sweeping statement to do something without more input from the people who are on the ground in the city. But I think that might be, I see the value of that in that list gets updated with some regularity. And the city list was from like 1999 or something. So it's really outdated, and there's a lot of species that are considered very invasive that aren't on it.
from a regulatory perspective, so we use the nuisance list in land use applications because we have requirements that people have to get rid of nuisance plants when they do development. And we can't adopt an updating list. We have to update, we can only adopt a static list. And then
Okay.
if there are changes, then we have to go through the adoption again. And I know it was adopted via resolution, so we can do resolutions. I just want to acknowledge that from our, if you want to add what's on this list with our existing list or take things away, that is all good. We'll go through a resolution process, but we'll have to do that every time, which is fine. It's not that, it's definitely something that we can accomplish, but we can't just point over to theirs. We'll have to like wholesale adopt it.
Okay, well, see, I didn't know that. So that sounds like a nightmare. But then again, ours obviously needs to be updated because there are lots of really big gaps in it. So.
Yeah, we're good at paperwork. We can make that part happen.
So can I ask one question for clarity for myself? Looking at the municipal plant list, or the municipal code enforcement, it lists noxious weeds on the code enforcement language, which would allude to state or county noxious weed lists, which are the regulatory lists that are there that are routinely updated. So I understand the nuisance plant list being part of the planning process and part of that approach. So maybe serving a different purpose in that respect, apart from like the enforcement issues surrounding nuisance within code enforcement as it's defined in the code. So that might be the difference in what we're describing, the use of planning and the use for enforcement. But I don't know, Laura, you may have more clarity there.
No, I think you're on the right track. So yeah, it just matters what we want to use it for, but I can dig into that, and then I will send out everybody a link from Sam, and then we could put it on our next agenda item to talk about it.
Sounds good. Yeah, I know Pete last time was talking, we talked about the fact, it's like everything in Oregon City, the codes are really only enforced if somebody complains, a lot of the code violations. So, I know one of my neighbors somebody turned her in for her yard, which is nothing but English ivy and now clematis. And she's like, but it's so pretty. And so, but I don't know that she ever did anything, that was several years ago, and it's even more English ivy now. So, I'm not sure what happened with that, but I know that it does happen occasionally. People get turned in, but I don't know how effective it is to actually turn people in. So I try to keep giving her good plants so that she'll pull the ivy out and put, here are some irises. Here's some of this. So she has been whittling down the ivy as I've given her other plants to put in. So, but yeah. Okay, I think I think we've done quite a bit on that. So,
I have a quick question for Laura and maybe for discussion next time is exactly what Sam was saying for utility of the lists. So if Laura's thinking this is, if we're wanting to apply this list for planning purposes, which is distinguished from enforcement purposes, it would be good for us to know what the protocol is for updating that the planning component so that we know when we're asking to update these lists, what that entails for the city and for staff. So if we want to go through the, adoption of the county's list every time there's an update, it'd be good to know what that means for going forward. And if it means we do it every 2 years, whether or not there's been a change, or or just every time there's a change. And maybe Sam can tell us how often it updates, but it would be good to know what that internal municipal process is in reflection of updates from the county so that we maintain consistency and relevancy with our county partners. So Sam, how often does it update?
Well, so at the county level, our program revisits the county or reviews the noxious weed list, the county noxious weed list once a year. We typically do that in December and try to make changes usually in January. So it's kind of ahead of the field season. And we update the county list at that time. The state of Oregon actually updates their noxious weed list at potentially at all Oregon State Weed Board meetings. And I think they used to meet 4 times a year. I'm not sure what they're at now. I think it's twice a year that they're doing that. So there's potential for noxious weed lists at the state level twice a year.
and I don't know that we need to update it that frequently. But the fact that this hasn't been updated since 1999 means there's glaring emissions on it. So maybe an even every 5-year thing would be better than what we're doing now.
And again, that's kind of the difference between what you're asking about, Sam, is the noxious weed list, which would be your county and state list. But your nuisance plant list, which is maintained by the city, would be different. And right now your code references the noxious weed list, but your policy is referencing the nuisance list.
Mm.
That's the way I see it.
So would it make sense to discuss calibrating the two? It seems confusing to me from a citizen perspective to have 2 different lists apply to 2 different components of municipal policy. I mean, for enforcement and then for planning. Does it make sense to calibrate to have them be the same or to have them differentiated? I don't know if anyone wants to touch that question.
I'll do a little bit of research to see if our legal restrictions for the land use component may be different than, if we can just, I suspect we can, since we do, for code enforcement nuisance plant lists, just point to, a list that's continually updated by somebody else. For land use, I know we can't do that. Let me dig into what we can and can't do and those limitations. And that might help provide clarity that maybe it's okay to have 2, one for code enforcement and one that's updated list for land use, because land use, yeah, we can, let me look at some codes and I can work through that for you guys. And I'll write up a report, hopefully by the next meeting. It might have to be 2 meetings from now.
Okay. Yeah, it's confusing. I didn't realize that the planning was using it that much. So yeah, and so I realize if you're in the middle of doing some type of a development, you don't want the rules to change underneath you, but maybe it can be rewritten. So whatever it is, when you start doing your planning process, that's the list you use rather than whatever, if it gets updated in the middle of it or something. So I don't know. I don't know the legalese part of it. So, but yeah. Okay, anybody else want to say anything about invasive species before we move on to the street tree list?
Just thanks, Sam Leininger, for coming. Nice to see you.
Definitely, that was a huge help. Thank you very, very much.
Good to see you both. And I know this is a complicated issue, and I told you I've worked on dozens of lists, and you guys are about par for the course. It's way harder than you think it is when you start the process. So, just keep on plodding along and you'll get through it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'm gonna check out. So thanks so much.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Okay, so we were talking about updating the street tree list. So Laura, what do you have to show us? I know we talked about it last time and Sam made some really good suggestions. And so.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen. While that's coming up, I can just do a brief intro. So the goal is to update our street tree list. Let's see how this topic evolved. From my understanding, NRC was wanting to update the street tree list to address climate change, and particularly there was some species of trees that had a lot more trouble during the ice storm than others, but also general climate change. Since that time, the City Commission has also said, well, since you're doing that, why don't you go ahead and take a look and make sure the species are right, because we have places where street trees are lifting sidewalks and planted in small spaces, and the trees are going to do what the trees are going to do and don't like the small space in some cases. And as policy over time, we used to not have a street tree list, then we did have a street tree list. Street tree list has changed over time. We originally adopted it in, I think, 99 or so, and then we updated it in 2013, and that's what we're looking at is the street tree list as it stands from 2013. And so parts of the City Commission is particularly interested in is some basic questions of like, for these sizes of planting strips, is it always a good idea to plant a tree in a 2.5 foot planting area? Is that sufficient? If so, are these species correct for street trees? Also, you should know that when we approve street tree lists, people can pick a species off our list, or they can pick a species off another local jurisdiction's list. We point people to Gresham and Portland. And they can also have approval from, I think it's an arborist, I'll have to double check. But if a certified arborist says that another species is okay, then it's okay too. We originally, years ago, used to just use our list and that's it. And then we ran into supply problems. And so years ago we said, okay, our list, and then anyone else near us that has a list too. So I want to, when we're going through this, I listened to the last meeting, so I just want there to be some awareness that this list doesn't mean it. So we'll look at our nuisance list, and if the tree is on our nuisance list, we don't allow it, but if it's on somebody else's list or a certified arborist says it's fine, then it's fine. So we have the remove, we have this category that was here. I added add to it, so the bold ones, it looks like, were added. And then I just added a comment list. So as we start to add it, we'll explain why we're doing what we're doing when we go through the approval process. Street tree list, it was adopted by resolution. So any amendments will be adopted by resolution, which is not a big deal. We can take care of that. We have with us this evening Andrew Land from Friends of Trees. And from my understanding, Andrew sources the trees from Friends of Trees. So is here to help us really look at these pairings of trees to sizes and help us talk through that.
Andrew, I think you're muted if you're trying to talk. Is he talking? I can't tell.
Sorry, I couldn't get myself unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think that worked finally. Sorry. Yeah, this is a strong start. There are a couple of thoughts that we had. I met earlier with Erica and with Ian just to think some thoughts. The I guess we were curious a little bit about the idea of removing all maples. Was that just out of concern for the pest, Asian longhorn beetle, which is, yeah. And that's, that's a very real thing. And the only consideration around that is that there's also the reality of folks wanting, they're a very desirable tree, and we do not offer them, for example, in Portland. Portland has not had them on their approved list for quite some time, and so I guess there's some question about whether some species of maple might be admissible. In other words, the Asian longhorn beetle generally ignores Acer palmatum, Japanese maples. Japanese maples are not exactly bulletproof trees for climate change. They're not the most, their structure is a little bit unsound. A close relative of theirs that also happens to be a native, however, is the vine maple. So that's something to consider. I guess also another starting point, and maybe Laura, you might be able to answer this, is there's not currently an inventory, is there, for Oregon City? We don't have any idea how many maples there are. Okay. Yeah.
That's on the drawing board. That's
Good.
one of the priorities to start doing that soon.
Good. That's great to hear, because that's a really strong starting point. It's really hard to, you're kind of flying blind until you have any idea how many of your street trees are of one species or genus or family. When I took the arborist exam, I think it was 8 years back, there was the recommendation that an urban forest should be no more than 10% of the exact same species, no more than 20% from the same genus, and no more than 30% from the same family. A more climate change resilient update to that is 5, 10, 15 nowadays. So, Portland, we did an inventory here, I think, 5 years back, and they said, whoa, my God, you got 30% maples. If Asian longhorn beetle arrives, you got some serious problems. It'll be just like Dutch elm. And it's immediately followed by the public health problems that pop up, asthma, cardiac problems, low birth weights. I mean, it's a serious thing. So it's very good to have some idea of what you're working with, and you're doing an excellent thing to review the list currently for, in general, the trees that are best for climate change will be those that are drought tolerant, as well as pest and disease resistant. And then there is also the consideration of the structure, the natural structure. Is it a tree that is normally characterized by a good form that's not very high maintenance, that doesn't require a very regular pruning cycle to make sure that, if we have an ice storm or a snowstorm and then wind hits the tree with ice or snow, it's not going to fail. So if some trees more naturally than others will have a very strong structure, they'll have strong wood. Other trees, conversely, will have less strong structure or less strong wood and are, I joke about them being eager to break, so I also heard you mention that sidewalks are a concern. I can even, tell you in my neighborhood, in like the 1960s, I think it was, this neighborhood that I happen to live in was a redlined African-American neighborhood in the 60s, and the African-American churches came together and planted something like 500 flowering cherry trees, which 50 years later just destroyed the sidewalks, so we're having a really hard time. I mean, I started at Friends of Trees 10 years ago as a volunteer. Actually, it was 12 years ago as a volunteer, and knocked on all the doors and said, hey, we're right next to a highway. That's a serious public health problem. We've got a lot more particulates in our air. What do you say to a street tree? And almost categorically said, have you seen my sidewalk? You know who paid for that? Me. That was $3,000 of my money. No, thank you. Get out of my face. So anyway, I just mentioned that cherries are one thing that kind of stood out on the list as like, I would reconsider those, or at least give them as much space as possible. They're beautiful. That's the downside to them. A few others, I guess, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, and feel free to interrupt me if you have questions or comments, but A few other things in reviewing the list that kind of grabbed my attention: ash trees. You know, in the same way that there is the looming threat of the Asian longhorn beetle that eats maples, there is the emerald ash borer. So ash trees are another one that has been not on the approved list in Portland for 7 or 8 years now. You know, again, they're beautiful. They have their place. They probably wouldn't be a good investment as a public street tree. The three others, just so cherries, I would take a second look at just because of the sidewalks. Ashes because of the emerald ash borer. Saphira species are, in my mind, pretty soft wooded trees, and I think of them as a little bit, you know, again, kind of eager to break. But I had a personally bad experience with a saphira tree, and I shouldn't speak categorically, but I think of them as relatively soft wooded trees. And then the two others, we do offer two types of cercis, of redbud trees. You know, in general, flowering trees sell themselves. Everybody's interested in a flowering tree. Everybody's interested in maples for fall color. You know, I get it. I understand it. That's a lot of our connection to trees. Redbuds, I moved out here actually I grew up in Washington, D.C., and, you know, redbuds, I saw them all up and down I-95 on the East Coast. They're great in the springtime. I tried them over and over and over, and they failed. And you know, we still have a hard time getting them to, again, they're kind of on that I snidely call them eager to die. Like, they're not very drought tolerant. They're just, so redbuds, yeah, I would take a second look at those. And finally, Stewardia japonica, Japanese Stewardia's beautiful tree. Honestly, I planted one in my own backyard in honor of my own daughter's birth, you know, so that's a testament to how much I respect them. I wish I hadn't. They're just, every summer, you know, 2 weeks ago, half its leaves went brown. They're just not a tree for climate change. And they have been taken off the street tree list in the city of Portland.
I say mine's doing fine, but it's in the middle of my garden that gets watered a lot. So
yeah, see,
yeah.
Exactly. If they're, you know, in the right place, and like a lot of trees, Katsura is another one that's just a beautiful tree, as long as they get plenty of moisture and a little bit of protection. You know, there are some others that they're just more particular. So, you know, to have a really robust street tree list for the public right of way, you want options that are kind of, I mean, everything has its risks, you know. And actually earlier today I saw that quote from Maya Angelou. It says, "Do the best you can with what you know. When you know better, do better." You know, at this point, you know, we'll do the best we can, and there's plenty of stuff. A new pest, for example, might pop, and I'm like, oh my goodness, we've got those. But again, that's the importance of having an inventory so that you can keep track of, you know, hey, we've got 5% paper bark maples or 5% whatever it may be. We won't go past that, because again, if something pops up that we don't expect now and we lose all of them, we're still, you know, one of these. Biodiversity, resilience, biodiversity is it equates to resilience in nature, you know. So we want to have as much diversity as possible so that kind of no matter what comes, we have something left.
Laura, do you remember what they planted up in that subdivision that caused all the sidewalks to rise up, that's causing a big issue with the city right now? I don't remember what the tree was.
Oh, there's 3 subdivisions, and I'll have to take a look and see. I can't remember off the top of my head which one it was, but 2 of the subdivisions, all the trees were on the street tree list at the time. And then the other one, they had a certified or a landscape architect sign off on them that they were appropriate. I'll have to take a look and see what the species are. But since I'm talking and we're talking about tree inventory, I was going to save it towards the update. But the City Commission passed the package for tree canopy restoration. So thank you for helping us talk about that. So it's the money towards new plantings, and we're using Friends of Trees. We've already approved a contract with Friends of Trees for that. And then there's also a series of other pruning events and things like that. One of the components was a money set aside for arborists. And it wasn't really that much money. I can't remember, maybe around $15,000 or so. There was $2,000 dedicated towards this tree inventory, and you guys had talked about that going towards like media or event or, you know, some type of marketing. And then the tree inventory as a summary, we were going to create an app where people would sort of self-report. So it'd be a crowdsourced tree inventory. So back to the arborists, we are not getting a lot of people. We've only had one person actually tell us that they would be interested in using the arborist money. We're doing more advertisement with the program because it was actually just approved. And so if we don't hear a lot of need for the arborist money, we've been talking internally, and I should have talked to John about this before right now, but of shifting some of that money towards the tree inventory and like, you know, is there something where we could get some help with giving the street tree inventory a boost? So depending on if we've got some leeway in the arborist fund, we can reuse that for tree inventory, but we at least have the $2,000 for the tree inventory. That's set and loaded, and we'll see what happens with the arborist money because $15,000 can also go very fast.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, awesome. I know that there are canned, really good apps for doing street tree inventories. You know, lots of them. Somebody at our school, they had a thing on the news about after the ice storm and all the trees that Linfield lost. And one of our students, her uncle owns, he does one of the tree inventory. He's in charge of one of those software. So they gave us the software package. And I have one of my students is helping the grounds guy inventory. We'd already inventoried all the trees, but that was 15 years ago. So he's going around and putting them on the map where they're supposed to be. And so, but yeah.
yeah, if you didn't know, our GIS department is amazing. And we've created a similar app that we've used for identifying sidewalk problems. So we did an inventory of something else. And so our GIS department can make an app that you just download on your phone, take a picture of the tree, you can answer questions that we put in there, and then it geolocates it. And
Be cool.
it's good.
Be good to work with somebody who knows what kind of tree stuff you want, you know, like diameter and, you know.
So I want to chime in before we get too far ahead. So there is a program already developed for Oregon's urban forestry inventory programs. So there's already one available. It's calibrated with other municipalities across the state, and it has everything available, and you don't even need an app. You just need a device that has internet access and can, you know, you can move around. You have to be mobile. So there's no special app. There's no other development that you need to do unless you really don't like this application. So I'd recommend hesitating too much discussion at this point into development because there is something really available. Highly recommend we explore it before we make more decisions, and it's available. And they're actively hoping we knock on their door. So I'm just telling you now, there's folks at ODF that support this sort of work and have a program available, eagerly awaiting us to jump in. So we can talk more about it at a different time. But as far as the street tree list, I do have some questions for Andrew about. So I agree about the maple issue. I was kind of just putting them on a hiatus, not a 100% removal, more like let's consider other trees before we consider maples. And I don't know how to write that into a street tree inventory beyond saying diversity is valuable. Most municipalities tend to overplant maples. We don't know exactly what Oregon City's inventory looks like. They probably plant more maples than we should. But yeah.
And you know, even things like there are kind of workarounds, like an Amur maple is from China. It's already relatively impervious to the Asian longhorn beetle, so you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. You're absolutely right, Samantha. You know, generally speaking, that's what they predict. They'll come and eat all our maples, but there are some that will do better. So if you're gonna offer any, just offer those. You know, and again, the vine maple. I don't think it's impervious. It's apparently the closest relative to Japanese maples, which are impervious. But even as a native, meanwhile, it's supporting, you know, trees are the backbone of our local food chain. So, you know, what the heck, have it there. And if worst case scenario down the road it's gone, well, it could be replaced, but it's a small tree anyway. And I think the most important thing, if you don't mind me continuing, is just there's several options, for example, that would make for more robust lists, by limiting something. The reality is, it's like going into a restaurant. If you go into a restaurant and there are 3 things on the menu, you may be like, I don't see anything I want, I'm going to get out of here. If you go in there and there's a really long list, you're probably going to find something that you like. And the beauty of that is that then you'll have a more resilient urban forest. You'll have, all types of trees that have all types of tolerances. So several, as I think Laura mentioned, I do our procurement. I'm working on that. I'm reviewing availabilities this time of year. And there are a few things that jumped out that they could probably add some, for example, more oaks. Oaks are said to be one of the great, trees for climate change. And actually along the lines of the food chain, there's an entomologist from the University of Delaware named Doug Ptolemy. Actually, Samantha, I don't know how long you've been with OCT, but I think I saw him at OCT. I think it was 6 or 7 years ago. Does that sound familiar? He wrote a book about backyard habitats. And does that sound familiar? Yeah. And he came and really blew my mind. He was saying, hey, in Delaware, there's a native oak, and it hosts something like 450 different types of insects that feed the small birds, that feed the small mammals, that feed the mammals. And he said the second best host of native insects in my area hosts something like 150. He said it's not even close. It's off the charts in terms of its ecological importance, and really kind of rung a bell in my own brain. So wow, everybody's always said, of course I understood natives are important, but that really sent it home to me. He actually just came out with a book called The Nature of Oaks, and he's just saying this is the genus that we should be planting, nationwide more than anything. So oaks, obviously there were several on there. But just, adding oaks, there are a number of varieties. I don't know what detail to get into at this point, but oaks as a genus, I would advocate for. Ginkgos as literally the oldest tree on Earth. 275 million year old tree. They've kind of seen it all. They literally survived the bombing of Hiroshima. They'll do okay with climate change. We can do. There are a lot of cultivated varieties of ginkgo, so smaller, larger, columnar, and they're a great option. So expanding on that is great. I saw the dawn redwood, which is a great tree. An almost identical twin to that, the bald cypress, is another great option. I say that it's the state tree of Louisiana. Which I read some article about how one of the reasons is that they can take these hurricane winds and literally kind of do this and just bounce right back up. They don't fall apart in extreme wind. They're accustomed to really high heat. The bald cypress, Taxodium.
Do they need water?
They are.
I associate them with swamps. So
yes, absolutely. It's a very good point. Yes, but that's one of the beautiful things about them is they're drought tolerant in addition to being kind of flood resistant. They're a kind of a good, in my mind, just like a relatively accommodating species. And for when you're talking about public trees, that's a good option. Liriodendron, tulip trees. I may have overlooked them, but Samantha, do you work with Jim Gersbach? Yeah, and Jim, I had a conversation a few weeks ago with an old coworker from Friends of Trees, and he has a tulip tree in his backyard, and he said, Jim Gersbach, who's now at ODF, was crowing about how they're one of the best, street trees for climate change. They're originated on the East Coast where there's a tremendous diversity, and they've seen a lot, and now that they're out here, it's easier for them. The only challenge with them, and with several trees, the tricolor beech I saw on there, is that they do occasionally get aphids and have a little bit of stickiness beneath them, but again, for like a wider space, or even like as a front yard tree, for example, there would be a dynamite option. They're another benefit of them is that they are fast growing. There's kind of in general, with some exceptions, in general, trees either put their energy into rapid growth, your crab apples, or there's a long list of faster growing trees that are putting their energy into growth at the expense of durability. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got your Oregon white oak, you've got your ginkgos and such. That I have, my street trees are ginkgos. They're 15 years old. I think they're 15 feet tall. It's just like the slowest growing tree in the world. But not only are they putting their energy into self-defense, that they're pretty low maintenance. You don't have this explosion of growth every year that requires like a really regular pruning cycle, like something like a crab apple in general.
I have a ginkgo in my front yard. It's the only tree in my yard that didn't lose any branches in the ice storm. Even my black walnut, that when it got 1.5 inches started breaking. Nothing.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I have a female because I bought it a long time ago. So we will talk about those.
That's a whole other conversation. A few others to rattle off. I noticed, I think that there was one, a Cobus magnolia, but magnolias are another that is like 50 something million. You're not into them, Nancy?
Well, I have a saucer magnolia in my yard, and it's a third the height it was because it just broke. Every branch broke on it in that ice storm. Super softwood.
Fair enough. I mean, they're smaller. Yes, it's the pest and disease resistance that I think is more what I'm talking about. And they like a lot of flowering trees, they kind of sell themselves. They're attractive in that way. But fair enough. I think of the evergreen magnolias as the ones that really get they're more at risk. But we offer a pretty wide menu of magnolias. Yeah, fair enough.
I have a super tall one. I wanted to get a short one, and the guy at the nursery sold it to me saying it was only going to get like 15, 20 feet high. And I've cut it to my roof level 3 times now.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Is it a galaxy? Do you know what type of magnolia?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it blooms twice a year.
Yeah, that's nice. A few others, right quick. Pine, Ponderosa pine of Willamette Valley origin specifically. It's an early succession tree, which is to say, they do fine just sitting in wide open blistering sun. They're pretty durable. It's sad but true. I've even been staring at trees that are more fire resilient for obvious reasons. Pines are on that list. We had a massive fire across the street from our office. A 5-story tall construction site was set on fire, and it fried all our street trees, but our pine tree just kind of laughed. I mean, it looked rotten for a year and bounced back beautifully the next year. So that's one that I would consider. And just one other to mention was incense cedar. The western red cedar, for example, is the first native that I'm hearing a lot of local arborists saying, wow, they're kind of on their way out. They're the first victim of climate change. They're shallow roots. They're looking rough. Incense cedar, conversely, they seem to be tougher, so we're kind of just promoting them a little bit more than the western red cedar. The western red cedar, like a few other trees that we offer, Katsura is the second one that comes to mind, we still offer, but we have kind of a caveat. We say, hey, look, it's going to need a little bit of protection, a little bit more TLC. So as a street tree, TLC, yeah, that's just something. That's incense cedar was a good option. Oh, and finally, sorry, I overlooked a couple more. Carpinus hornbeams are fantastic. I think I saw the Franz Fontaine on there. That's a great one. Even the American hornbeam, the Carpinus caroliniana, small tree, but they're pretty accommodating. And I believe I saw Perodia or Persian ironwood. They're fabulous. They're really just tough trees from Iran. They can do just fine in flaming heat. And there are a couple of smaller cultivated varieties. The Vanessa, for example, and the Ruby Vase are smaller, kind of tidier, but they share that pest and disease resistance and incredible drought tolerance. So yeah, those are just some great options. And I throw that out there just because you're doing a fantastic job to review and say, hey, maybe we'll think twice about this, that, and the other. And as you remove those, add 2 or 3 times as many more options, because the wider the variety, the more likely you are to grab someone's attention and have them jump on board.
if you look at our list, especially those for the really small spaces that aren't very wide, are there any on there that we should take off because the roots would be too aggressive, like other than the cherries, which obviously should be on there, shouldn't be on there?
Yeah. Nothing that immediately is a red flag. No, I mean those look like good trees for small spaces. Actually, I should think out loud. You know, Cornus Florida, I would definitely reconsider. They get anthracnose. They get a fungal disease that's pretty. Yeah, they just don't look nice when they get it. It's kind of the arboricultural equivalent of acne. I don't think it'll kill them, but they just don't look that nice. But the Cornus Kusa, it's on here as Japanese dogwood. We call them Chinese dogwood. Those are impervious, so those are a better option. And Cornus Moss, personally, I'm a huge fan of them. To be honest, there is a cultivated variety called Golden Glory that is cultivated for its kind of upright, kind of tidier form. And that one, in my mind and heart, is kind of the best one. It's a little tricky to source, unfortunately. So there's always this, hey, that would be great. It would be great if we could plant a lot of evergreen oaks. They just don't, they're not available locally. Nobody sells them, or if they do, they're extraordinarily expensive. But anyway, Cornus Moss is a really rock solid, durable. I read at some point, I'm kind of into ethnobotany, and in the Middle Ages, they used Cornus Moss to make like axe handles and hammer handles. The wood's so dense, it doesn't float. I have a Cornus Moss Golden Glory outside of my house, just directly outside. I have kind of picture window in the front of my house. I have one right in my front yard, and it's fun in the fall to watch just everything else blowing like this. And my Cornus Moss is like a phone pole, just standing there without moving an inch. But otherwise, in answer to your question, Nancy, no, that looks like a good list. Carolina Silverbell might be a little bit bigger than that list in my mind. Yeah, that is, you've got it right in there, 35 feet. I'm looking at one outside the window here. They're a good sized tree. They're a great option. But if you might want to look at them at a slightly larger, for slightly larger spaces in my mind. Chinese pistache are fantastic. Crepe myrtles are fantastic. We're seeing more of them available locally. They're grown. Actually, some of the ones that we get have to come up from California. They apparently grow slowly in local nurseries, but they can grow them out a little bit. And once they're, transplanted here, they do great. Sorry, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. Chinese French tree is it's a deciduous member of the olive family. Very, very durable tree. Yeah. Yeah, lindens are another that are a great option. That they do host aphids, and aphids produce a sticky mess that is actually their excrement. It's more politely known as honeydew. But so underneath a linden or a tricolor beech or a tulip tree, there might be a little stickiness sometimes. So that's just something to consider, for cars and sidewalks. But they're very durable. Yeah, maybe a little sticky. There you go. The one actually, the silver, what's it called? Sterling silver linden, however, has tomentose leaves, which is to say their leaves have little tiny hairs on them that apparently the aphids don't like. So I've been keeping a wider glance at the sterling silver linden, which I think would be slightly bigger, probably on the next size up list. But yeah, sterling silver is a good one for avoiding that stickiness.
Andrew, I have a question about tree wells.
Yeah.
So I know Oregon City has a number of those, and maybe John has a question about what options would be good for those going forward, or even smaller kind of cutouts along major right-of-ways and on sidewalks. So those might be good questions for the Public Works folks. I don't know if John is still on and might have questions about those sorts of planting sites. But would you have any recommendations in those sort of planting options?
Well, it depends a bit on the size of the well. In general, I mean, in my mind, pardon me, they're relatively similar to any other. It's the soil volume underneath that it's the same as it would be if it were not a. When you're saying a tree well, you mean like a concrete cutout? Is that what you're saying? Okay, yeah. The one thing to consider, to look at more closely in my mind, is just that if a tree is surrounded by stone, stone is a thermal heat sink. So you want to make sure it's drought tolerant. If it's something that's at all drought susceptible, that would be something to avoid. So yeah, we could certainly review the list and just say, hey, that one are better drought tolerant. I won't do it right now, but we could certainly do that with no problem. And then is there like a standard size? Do you have any idea? I think in Portland it's 4 by 6 feet, or is it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I know John would have better ideas, but it was a conundrum for him and the Public Works, is trying to navigate long-lived trees in these kind of extreme circumstances, at least extreme for trees.
Sure.
And trying to find a way to find a tree species or list of species that would tolerate those situations for, a good amount of time and not require too much maintenance, which is kind of like, a hard tree to find.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. That's like the perfect tree. I might as well think out loud. I know that, for example, at Ground Zero in Manhattan, they planted 400 and something swamp white oaks. It's all the same tree. And it's just because a swamp tree does really well with, its roots under water. So under concrete or under asphalt, no problem. It's the same thing. It's anaerobic, So swamp white oaks immediately come to mind as a great option for that type of thing. I'm sorry, I don't have it memorized which list we would have them on, but they're a pretty small one. I also heard recently that they are one of the easiest of the oak varieties to transplant. So they take very readily. We plant the heck out of Oregon white oaks, just because of their ecological significance. The Willamette Valley for 8,000 to 10,000 years was white oak savanna. They're incredibly durable. They are a little bit tough to transplant, admittedly. We know that we anticipate losing, somewhere between 10 and 20% of them, and yet we still promote them as often as we possibly can, as often as somebody has the space for them. They're not a small tree, they can live forever. And then actually, conversely, the bur oak, which I think I may have seen on the list, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I recently heard is one of the toughest oaks to transplant, so they're tricky. One advantage that I believe I should ask a couple, if you don't mind asking. So is there at this point, I believe it's 1 1/4. Is there like a lower limit in terms of caliper size trees that you all permit in general, or do you have any regulations around caliper size?
We do. For street trees, new ones are supposed to be 2 inches in caliper. However, we allow replacements to be 1.5.
Okay. And there are for volunteers, like a 2-inch caliper tree is very large for volunteers to plant. They can be 200-300 pound root balls. We almost always do 1.5 inches, so I'm glad to hear that. And one thing I was thinking is, honestly, I understand that there's certain fragility in planting smaller trees. However, they establish more quickly. So when you're transplanting a tree, it never happens in nature. It's very unnatural. And when you cut through all those roots, you throw off the balance between the canopy, the roots and the shoots, we say. So the shoots up top and the roots below. So it takes, a certain amount of time for those roots to be restored such that there's an equilibrium between the canopy and the roots. Smaller trees is less disturbance, so, and I'm just saying that because, Gresham, some other local municipalities are a little bit more lenient in terms of like, yeah, 1 1/4 is okay, or 1 1/4, 1.5. for oaks specifically, I think I'm starting to recognize that's one of the challenges. You can easily plant smaller oaks, and I shouldn't say easily, but more easily plant smaller oaks and expect them to succeed. The larger the oak, the more it's called transplant shock that it's going to experience, and that can be traumatic. So that can not go well.
That may be something that we should consider in terms of when we're planting new trees, to maybe allow smaller trees to go in if they're not replacing something, like a heritage tree or something, but because that is a concern.
And it also, especially when if they're planted by volunteers, again, the weight becomes an issue, and they're lower cost. I think the only, in my mind, disadvantage is just that people would say, oh, they're smaller, they're more fragile, just like a smaller person. Oh, they're more, and yet the flip side to that argument is, they say that once you plant a tree that's 4 inches caliper or larger, the transplant shock is so extreme that it's almost not worth it. I even know there's this local, anyway, we don't get into that, but the point being, if you planted, for example, a 2-inch caliper tree and a 1-inch caliper tree, the 2-inch caliper tree might take 4 or 5 years of summer watering to properly establish. The 1-inch caliper tree will take, 2, maybe 3. And actually, there's a kind of a point at which, it's like, wow, I planted a 2-inch caliper tree next to a 1-inch caliper tree. It's much bigger on planting day. 3 years later, the 1-inch caliper tree is bigger because it overcame the transplant shock, and it was able to persevere and jump into, healthier growth earlier, as opposed to the 2-inch caliper tree, which takes. So, we certainly plant 2-inch caliper trees, in Portland and Vancouver, often at more commercial sites. Residences were a bit more, in this immediate area, at least a bit more forgiving. Yeah, 1 inch, 1.5 inch, for example, is the standard in front of a house in Portland, and that goes quite well. We do a huge amount of summer monitoring, and we have 97% survival for 7 or 8 years now of our first year trees. It has a heck of a lot to do also with, planting is great. That's really sexy. It's the hard work is making sure that it gets established, so monitoring, making sure that people are watering, mulching to insulate those roots and hold that moisture and keep lawnmowers away. That's kind of the heavy lifting. But again, so planting is crucial. And then during the establishment phase, it's making sure that people are watering deeply, weekly. And unfortunately, in this weather that we have, 85 degrees in my mind or more, it quickly becomes, twice a week. I, for example, would water my trees on like a Saturday morning. And if it were 90 degrees, I'd water them Saturday and Wednesday, give them a really deep drink until they're established, and then once they're established, I've gotten to the point where I really anthropomorphize trees to make so that it makes sense to people when I'm talking on the phone. I'm like, look, even Mike Tyson needed a bottle when he was a baby, but he grew up to be a pretty tough guy, so this tree here, it's a mighty tough tree, but you're going to have to give it water. That's just the way it goes. And then mulch is the other thing. Like I said, it really, soil quality is in the built environment. In any built environment, the soil becomes compacted, it becomes depleted. I always say a forest floor is perfectly mulched. Every fall it has a shower of leaves and a shower of twigs, and they compost in place. And those leaves are composted, are digested by bacteria, and that wood is broken down by fungi, and you have beautiful, healthy soil, but not if it's exposed. As soon as it's exposed, all hell breaks loose. So cover it with a few inches of mulch, and you're one of these. So anyway, that's our wheelhouse, so to speak. We certainly plant, but making sure that the trees become established, that's crucial. And then actually, before I forget, I touched on inventories earlier on. To look beyond the inventory, the value of an inventory is that it tells you what's in the urban forest. do you currently have like removal and planting and pruning permitting? How is that handled, or is it handled?
We do have permitting for removal and we require replacement. There's no permitting for pruning. We have standards in our code that, we've got to be able to walk underneath a tree and
Yeah.
drive. So there's clearance standards, which I'll admit get really tricky with young trees that
Yeah.
aren't that tall yet.
Exactly. It's so funny. I mean, we actually a good friend of mine who now works at Vancouver Urban Forestry and I started our pruning program. I think it's 8 years ago now, and we joke about how adolescent trees are just like adolescent humans. Are a little bit awkward. They're like often you got to prune them kind of two-dimensionally at the bottom until they're old enough that you can raise them out of the way. As you're saying, Laura. So. But anyway, I'm sorry, I was thinking that out loud just because the value of an inventory is that you can maintain, a good idea of what's in the urban forest in perpetuity, but that requires the permitting. So I'm glad you've got that because, take out that tree in front of that address, and unless you know what went back in, your data becomes useless pretty quickly. And sorry, Laura, pardon me, did you say you don't currently have pruning standards, or you don't have permitting rather for?
No, we do have standards, no permitting.
No permitting.
So
Yeah.
if you kill the tree, the city will come talk to you. If you do anything short of that, you're fine.
Right.
I mean, we have, other than clearance standards, just sort of please keep it alive is from the regulatory perspective.
And that's I know I've through Erica and Ian, I've heard we're doing some work in the area with pruning, and that's just crucial. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's one of those, as a middle-aged guy, I'm really into like micro lessons in life. I'm not still in, academic environments constantly. And I really love those little, in 2 hours, I just learned something that's just so darn useful. It's not rocket science. And yet there's a right way to do it. The science of it, you could impart in an hour, the art of it. Yeah, that takes, time and experience, of course. But, and yet people just, I'll just go prune my tree. Oh, no, don't do that. People mess it up all the time. So I'm glad to hear that you have standards already, and then just showing these few basic techniques and just thinking through thoughts like, hey, you should anticipate that it's going to be a little awkward for a minute. You might, my battery's a little low here. Yeah, it might look a little funny for a minute there. It might have, two-dimensional branches parallel to the sidewalk and street. But as soon as it's old enough, we'll raise that out of the way. But hang in there. It needs those solar panels to fuel those, solar panels being leaves, solar panels to fuel that healthy growth while it's little. I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk at you. I'm just kind of spewing off the top of my head here, but if there's any other questions or anything else, I'm happy to be a resource. Obviously, this is step one. We'll keep the conversation going with Ian and Erica.
This has been really, really valuable. Really has been. So really appreciate you joining us and brain dumping.
Good. Yeah, it's absolutely kind of it's like a passion of mine too. I've like trees and climate change, trees and public health. I should even point that out. Things like the ponderosa pine, for example, fantastic air filters. And the reason they're fantastic air filters is just like a broom. A broom dust sticks to surface area. Those leaves that are super long and skinny, just like the tines on a broom, it's all surface area. So that those little particulates stick to it everywhere, So there are specific trees that are those trees with tomentose leaves, little hairy leaves, like I said, the sterling silver linden, that grabs particulates out of the air. Actually, one that I forgot to mention is a hardy rubber tree called Eucommia, Eucommia. I will admit they're not the most beautiful trees. They don't have, fantastic fall color or beautiful flowers or anything like that. Boy, are they rock solid air filters. They are like just fabulous. And it's because they have these really...
Whoop. He disappeared.
The battery got him.
Yeah, he said he was running low, so.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
I gotta
does he
look
have energy on trees though? That's exciting
Yeah.
to listen to him.
That really was. That was
Yeah.
that was awesome. That was impressive.
I would have just loved the PowerPoint going along with it, with pictures of all these trees.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta look up I've never heard of a euphomia before. So it's
Yeah,
like,
I
"Ooh,
know.
what's that?"
It's that I'm not familiar with. So I was.
So I'm happy to, so thank you, Laura, for taking notes. I took some notes. I might have missed some. I'm happy to integrate his notes into the street tree list if that would be valuable for the group. And we can keep the discussion going. I agree that we want to keep some maples on the list, just to appease the diehard maple enthusiasts, and keep them engaged in planting trees. So yeah, very valuable to have Andrew there. Thank you so much for inviting him.
Definitely. That was great. Yeah. Oh, wow. Now my brain's full of trees. After measuring baby trees all day. I thought they were all cedars though. But okay, so on to communications. Anything else for trees before we move on?
Just want to clarify my next steps. Let's see. Sorry.
He's back.
All right. Did we want to fit? Are we done with the tree one, or should I go to next steps, or do you want to follow
Yeah.
up any finishing touches
Let's-
with Andrew?
Do you have any last things to say? We figured your battery died.
Yeah, thank you. I pushed my luck. I'm sorry. It was telling me it was low. That's what I get for ignoring it. That's the essentials, honestly. Yeah, I could bore you to tears, so I could cut it off there unless you have any other questions.
We said we wanted a PowerPoint to see pictures of all the trees.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're gonna integrate what your suggestions were into our list, and we'll probably revisit this again next month. And maybe be ready to actually send the proposal to the city.
Great. You all you're right on track. It's wonderful to really think ahead, and yeah, we're planting trees. Our area is said to be, in one generation, we'll be living in a climate akin to that of Medford to Sacramento. We've got to be thinking ahead. It's sad but true, but we know what's coming.
Yeah.
So good for you.
Thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome.
Great.
If you don't mind, I'll slip out of here.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
All right, so I will send Samantha the Excel file so you can type on in. Perfect.
Great. Okay, so we move on to communications, and we have a heritage tree program update. Yeah, John, are you leaving? Bye, John.
Bye, John. Okay, I will pass along to John. I think he heard him, but the information related to tree wells too. Or if we want to have a separate category just for tree wells on the street tree list, or I don't know.
That might be valuable. It might be up to him. Let's ask him if he thinks that it would be valuable to just have a list of trees for those.
So many options. Okay, so Heritage Tree Program. So I updated the website I think I updated the website. I went through the past few years of Heritage Tree approvals and included them. So it should be up to date. There is no Heritage Tree applications that we have that have not been processed right now. So we are fully up to date on processing that. Pete did all of that work. And then, but there are 2 properties that we're working on with the property owners to designate heritage tree groves within the Thimble Creek Concept Plan area. So we're working with the Halls on the property kind of at Loader Road. There is sort of north of the airport there. They were waiting for the application. I sent them the application and they said they'll be filling it out. And if they have any questions, they'll let us know. So they're very excited, and I would anticipate an application soon. But if they have any questions, I might reach out. I think Nancy and
Mike
Mike went on that one. Okay.
Right.
So I'll
So
reach
either
out to you.
both of us, we can talk to them.
Okay, perfect. It sounded like they were knew what to do and just needed to sort of type it in, and we're good to go. The other one was the golf course property, and so we were looking at some tree groves there. And that one, they're currently in the process of doing a survey related to potential future development. And so they need to figure out sort of where those trees are, and that will kind of help inform. So the interest is still there, still moving forward on that, but it turns out we'll be getting more good data to figure out, to make sure that in the long run, that it'll complement the heritage tree designation. So still a lot of excitement, just a slightly different place.
We did kind of help them pick trees that were right on the edge of the slope. So probably an area that you wouldn't put a development anyway. So yeah.
It sounds
Fingers
like,
crossed.
yeah, and once they get that, I think they'll be a lot more informed about what piece is going where and how they envision it going in the future.
It's a bit
Excellent.
more complicated though, because they have this buyer and they're designing a plan for what they're going to do and how it would all fit in.
Yeah.
It is complicated, but I think also what seems exciting is that they have more resources to really understand where they are and what the health is like for each of them too. So it feels like maybe perhaps we'll know a lot more,
Okay.
especially after the ice storm, like exactly how well did they fare and which ones make more sense and stuff. So
Right.
moving in a good direction. That's all I have for the Heritage Tree Program.
Great. That's fantastic. Okay, so then we're on to the update of resolution number 2132, the tree mitigation stuff.
Sounds so official. How we
I know,
make
I had to
that.
make it sound good, you know?
Yeah, so sorry for hijacking the conversation a little bit earlier with details about that, but the City Commission did approve the resolution, and we're doing now a bunch of community engagement is about ready to start to tell people about the program, which includes planting a significant number of trees is the largest component of the program, and we would be doing that in conjunction with Friends of Trees. This you guys already know. If people sign up to tell us about their trees that are affected from the storm, then they'll be first in line to get the Friends of Trees trees. Then there's also a couple other components of the program. So we talked a little bit about the arborist. So we have a little bit of work to do on the arborist, but we're still kind of in the wait and see how much interest there is for arborists to come and assess trees that have not already been removed. We're finding that a lot of the trees have just been removed. So we'll see what bounces back on that.
I'll talk
But-
to my neighbor who has, actually two of my neighbors still have lots of things hanging down, and they've done the limbs that they could reach, but there's some up there that they're just not capable of getting to. So I'll make sure that they know about this and can reach out.
And the arborist will just be standing on the ground giving advice.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So
But I think, one of the trees, one of them was so badly damaged that, it's still standing, but there's not much on it anymore. So I'm not sure that that's worth keeping or not. So,
that is the perfect place for the arborist to come in just to do the assessment. And that's kind of how we envision using the money, so it goes a little bit further. But if not, then some of it will roll back to you guys, or what we anticipate is we'll roll it back to see if we can get an intern to do a tree inventory, or some way to boost the tree inventory more. And if we can, seems like there's some natural pairing for things that are already going on. If we do, the ivy poll, then we could advertise the tree inventory. So there's a lot of ways that we can complement our work together with other
I
things.
know Portland did theirs, and Carrie or Sam, I know you worked on that, but I know that they hired people to kind of go out and coordinate things on the ground. And so then they'd have different neighborhoods where people would come volunteer, and they would do, the person who was being paid would help them how to assess the tree, how to measure the DBH, how to do stuff and help with species and stuff. So
They had a AmeriCorps
Mm.
folks.
Mm.
So it was seasonal, and it was also integrated with so it's basic AmeriCorps, and their application was kind of like an intern level, but it gave them, so it was, they're kind of funded by the America program, and then supported by the urban forestry program. So like they're kind of like both paying into that support. So I would highly recommend AmeriCorps. And you're finding really highly motivated young folks looking to get more experience in the world. So you can also attach like job learning to that function. So you're not just, there's multiple benefits to having an AmeriCorps situation. It creates partnerships, it creates, job growth and, on the job training and all that good stuff. So it's a good, I think it was a good use for an AmeriCorps position in that case.
Great.
yeah, AmeriCorps is great. We've used them a lot in a lot of different facilities. So yeah, really recommend them looking at that.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the tree inventory as well. I was talking to City of Wilsonville, and they did one last year, the year before. So they knew immediately, maybe they did it last year. They knew immediately after the ice storm what the damage was to the city. And it was really amazing that they could tell the difference so quickly. So
Yeah, they're invaluable. They're really, really long overdue to have one. So yeah. Other than Francesca walked around the McLaughlin neighborhood. And who was the other lady? There were two of them that walked around and so there's kind of one for the McLaughlin neighborhood where they didn't really measure things. They just noted. Somewhere there's a tree list for it. So Dee Dee has a copy. And the other lady walked by and she was going to leave it on my front porch and never did. So I can't remember her name. What was her name?
Well, and a way to get kids, excited about it and involved. So, or even older adults, heck, I walk around my neighborhood, you're always like, oh, I love that tree, or I love this, or I'm just curious. So if there's a way they can go immediately to punch in where they're at and see, oh, this is the tree, this is how old it is. Clearly I'm excited about the tree inventory. So
I think we all are.
yeah.
We'll all be out there helping.
Oh yeah.
So maybe a good item for next discussion is we could invite the folks from ODF who are recommending their application for tree inventories, and they can just quickly give you like a 10-minute presentation if that's of use. If that's a sufficient amount of time, they could do any amount, I'm sure, to just highlight the function and the benefit and how readily available it is for us to just kind of, basically it's just a signed document with the city saying it's okay for us to use it and not just be some rogue group using it. And that's about it.
Great.
Because it's a grant funded program, but I will caveat that statement saying it's probably going to sunset this year, the grant support. So after that, it might be like $300 a year or something to keep using the program in future. So I won't speak for them, but it's not going to be free forever.
Right. That's still relatively cheap. I have no idea what the thing cost that they gave us, but it was way more than $300.
Yeah. But I'm happy to give Laura the contact information if you want to go through the city, or I can just do it myself, whichever way is preferable.
Well, if you go through Laura, she's the one that's going to have to set up the agenda for next time. So that might be good, just so that she can make all the correct contacts and the Zoom in meetings and get the right stuff on the agenda. But yeah, but you could reach out to them and tell them we're going to do it too. So but I think that'd be a great idea.
And also Grants Pass recently did theirs using this ODF provided application. It's called, it's like a planet, it's by a company called Planet Geo. and they've got a name for an acronym, but I don't remember that. But basically, he utilized this program I'm recommending and created a guidance document for how he did it, how he did the inventory for Grants Pass. And I can't say how big Grants Pass is compared to Oregon City, but it's not, it's definitely not a Portland-sized city, and it's definitely not like a, Forest Grove-sized city. So I feel like they're relatively comparable and might have
I've
similar.
driven through Grants Pass a lot, and I'd say they're probably fairly comparable in terms of size.
Yeah, and he's the lone urban forester there, so he's kind of, feeling like he has limited capacity as well. So I feel like it's a good option to review and see if we could adopt some of the items that he used in his guidance document. So he's out on vacation now, but I can share it with the group when he shares it with me.
That'd be great. Yeah. Yeah.
About 40,000 people.
Okay.
How's that compared to Oregon City?
It's close. Yep. We're right there.
I'm just
We're-
thinking of the size as I drive through it, how long it takes to get through and how many shopping centers and McDonald's. And
I just know where the gas station is.
well, I've taken off because I always go to up the Illinois River that way. So, my favorite part of the state down there where it's on fire again. So, so are we
Okay.
good with
so,
this? Is there anything else that we've missed?
Sorry. One last thing is that the city commission work session for August, that is next month. John will be presenting, so it's a work session, so it'll be the second Tuesday of the month. He'll be presenting something, some proposal or plan related to the trees lifting the sidewalk up in Park Place, some type of sort of citywide approach to that problem. So I'll keep you guys informed because
I
we'll
know
meet
that's a
sort of
big
right after that.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. And then maybe John will, since he loves his meetings, he'll come back and talk to us a little bit more about it too. But for next meeting, then I'm hearing a presentation from ODF about the application. I might slide, if it's okay with you guys, the invasive item to learn a little bit more. If I can have 2 months to do that, just because we're stretched thin still since we haven't replaced.
Yeah, no, that's okay. We'll do
invaluable.
that in September.
Okay, and then we'll come back with that street tree list, and then we'll have street tree list, Kendall, and then ODF.
That should be pretty
Next
full.
month.
The other thing I want to say is next month, the meeting will be starting at 7 because at 6 o'clock, we're going to be having the official awards ceremony for Dee Dee winning the Heritage Tree thing. And so Heritage Tree people are going to be here. And Dee Dee being Dee Dee she has this whole guest list she wants. She wants all of us to come, and she wants, Doug to come, and she wants all the city commissioners and the mayor to come, and everybody who's gotten a street tree or a heritage tree to come. And so I'm going to have her send me and we just found out that we can do live events. So we can have like refreshments and cookies and, stuff like that at the meeting. So we'll be at City Hall. She wants a picture of something. I don't know. There's some tree. I don't know. A rock. I don't know. It's Dee Dee, I called her to talk to her, and it's like an hour and a half later. Dee Dee, I've got to go.
So we'll be good intro for next month. We will be live and in person with an opportunity to phone or Zoom in if you'd like to. The live and in person will be at City Hall, where we used to meet. So the Planning Commission, City Commission, and HRB are going to be at the new police facility, and then all the other boards and committees will be at City Hall. So there will be an option to attend remotely if you want to, or in person.
But if you can come at 6, so you can congratulate Dee Dee. She's so modest. She's like, I don't deserve this. Yes, you do. We would not have heritage trees without you. And I would never have bothered to try to rewrite the code without you bugging me continuously. Okay, I'll just rewrite the code. So yeah, it'll be good. She deserves it.
We will have to coordinate on the number of people though, because I'm not sure.
Right. I'll send her a thing and have her send me a guest list saying that there may be a maximum number of people we can invite. So, we'll figure it out, but.
Yeah, is there like a vaccine requirement or something like that for that as well?
Good idea.
There is not a vaccine requirement. And then we haven't come back for live in person yet, so I don't know. There's more details to be worked out about what that looks like, feels like for in person. I'll
Yeah.
let you guys know.
I'm probably remote until we've got that in place, just because I got a little one who can't be vaxxed. So we're playing that pretty close to the chest, but I'll be around. So
That's good. Yeah, I'm
With grandkids,
yeah.
I'd rather be with them than.
Yeah, I have an 8-year-old who can't, get vaccinated and has the immune system, really bad immune system. So, I still wear my masks when I go in stores. I'm about the only person in there with masks on, but I still wear it. So,
If everybody on the NRC would like to retain meeting on Zoom only, I can talk, or I can look into if that is an option to stay on Zoom.
okay.
But only if 100% of the people want to be on Zoom. And then I'll have to figure out if we have a guest. I could sit with a guest if they want to be in person. Anyway, so think in your mind, email me your thoughts individually. I won't tell
Just raise your
saying
hand
what. You don't have to say it on camera. You can tell me your thoughts. But if everybody would like to stay on Zoom, then I can look into see if that is an actual option or not.
Okay. I can go either way because I've been live with students since last fall. So, although we had masks on the whole time. So, but if we're spread out enough in City Hall, there's just a few people, I wouldn't feel so bad.
Okay, so I'll be in email contact before our next meeting.
Okay. Anything else? I think we're done then. So,
Right.
I
Yeah.
have a quick question, more questions,
Yeah.
real quick, I promise. One is about the tree list in terms of requiring, this is just an idea someone had that shared with me about promoting diversity of trees if they're planting a whole slew of trees next to, like on their property or even in a development, to somehow encourage this diversity in some way. I don't know if there's any policy or code that can address that or support that. I was curious what code talked about in terms of tree diversity, not just trees specifically.
The code does not require diversity of trees. We always try to encourage that, but it's not actually required. So if we wanted to have, through the regulatory arm, say a new subdivision comes in and we have a certain threshold of, if you have this many trees, you need so many species and so forth, we would have to change our tree code for that. That would be a little bit bigger of a lift.
could be problematic in some of those cases where they're cutting down white oaks and we're requiring them to plant so many white oaks because that's not diversity, but we're getting natives or something. So I don't know. I'm just playing devil's advocate there, but I agree. Definitely encouraging it, maybe more openly, vociferously or something would even be better.
Yeah, I can just imagine. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say there's two things I can do. One is we have a running list of code amendments we need to make or think about when we make code amendments, and I can add this to the list so we don't drop this idea.
Okay.
And then the second thing is we can work on whatever messaging on our website, or also when development comes in, the first step is to have a pre-application conference where they tell us what they want to do, and it's an informal thing, but we look at our code and we look at their plans and we say, like, here's where we see discrepancies or whatever. We have stock notes that we use, and we can add in that statements of encouragement for diversity of trees, because it's not required. It's just, like at the very beginning, like, hey, things to think about So we can certainly do that too.
And the other question that is okay to say no to is about that there's a relatively large strip of grassy area adjacent to the Mountain View Cemetery. I think it's on the north end. Like it's along, I think the road is Duane, but anyway, there's someone that walks that area frequently and thinks it would be great open space to plant a bunch of trees up and down that spot. It's pretty exposed between the cemetery and the residents that live there. So I'm curious how open Public Works would be to planting that strip more. It's like a 20-foot strip. It's pretty big.
Let's connect and I can, so I'm thinking, how do we get there? We can use this tree money through Friends of Trees through our recovery program to get more trees there. Normally we would have, is there a budding property owner then, you're saying?
It's cemetery with a fence, and then there's this big chunk of grass up and down the street, and then there's the road, and then there's private property. So there's no abutting private property to that large strip.
So that would be city property?
Sounds like right of way, I'm guessing, which is John's bailiwick, but maybe we'll have John and Kendall again in the same room next time. So it's on Duane. I'll talk to them both about it and see if they want to.
Yeah, you might want to check the street name. I'm bad with names, but you know where the cemetery is in the north end.
Okay.
Just a question. Thank you.
I'll follow up, but no guarantees on any responses.
We can bug them next week or next month. At least we can bug Kendall, and John maybe will come back, hopefully. Okay, anything else? Anybody have any announcements they want to make about anything?
I'm learning so much from you guys, and this was a great 2-hour learning session, let me tell you. So I know I've got a whole list of things. That's great.
I learned a lot too.
Yeah.
So,
No, seriously, thank you.
I have a quick question for the group. So I get all these emails for like urban canopy webinars and, you know, climate change informed planting lists and all that good stuff. But like, I am so busy, I don't have time to attend it all, even though I would love to. Would you guys be open to me sharing that with the group?
Mhm.
So I can
Yeah, I
just
think
at least
that's
pass
good.
it on.
Yeah.
You can always say no.
Right. I mean, and they're free. They're not,
Yeah.
you know,
No, that's
they're
great.
like provided by the Forest Service or something, and you just register and that's it.
That's
But
great.
but usually I'm in a different meeting or something, and I don't have the bandwidth I used to have. So
Yeah.
great, I'll pass them on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Right.
Anybody else? Mike?
No, I'm just saying goodbye.
Okay, well, in that case, the meeting's adjourned, and I will see you guys next month, except Mike.